I needed to conform to what they were doing and I was trying really hard not to, rock the boat too. But
Glow Gossip USA presents The Untold Story of Kody and Robyn Brown, a tale of manipulation, control, and the subtle gaslighting that quietly reshaped the dynamics of a once famous polygamous family. This isn't just reality TV. This is a masterclass in psychological strategy, betrayal wrapped in the guise of love, and the shocking journey from multiple wives to a controversial monogamous reality. From the very beginning, the sister wives saga had captured hearts, drawing audiences into a world where love, family, and devotion were measured against the unconventional backdrop of polygamy. Kody Brown, the patriarch, was a figure both admired and criticized, a man attempting to balance affection among four women while navigating the scrutiny of cameras, fans, and critics alike. But as the cameras rolled and the seasons progressed, one reality became clearer. Not every alliance was built on honesty, and not every heart was untouched by ambition. Robyn Brown entered this intricate network with a determination and strategy that would later redefine the family's path. Unlike her predecessors, she moved with calculated subtlety, never appearing overtly manipulative to outsiders, yet exerting influence in ways that only those closest could sense. Observers might have missed the nuances, the subtle undermining of other wives, the quiet moments that made Kody doubt his own judgments, and the strategic positioning that slowly shifted loyalties in her favor. What seemed like a harmless conversation or a casual request often carried layers of psychological precision, each move designed to strengthen her position while gradually eroding the cohesion of the sister wives' family. As viewers, we watched relationships strain under pressure, conversations filled with tension, and the weight of unspoken resentments slowly accumulate. Kody, often torn between affection and obligation, found himself increasingly swayed by Robyn's persistent narrative. It was never a loud confrontation. It was a slow, almost invisible reshaping of trust and attention. Fans might label it gaslighting, but within the Brown household, it manifested as doubt, hesitation, and a reshaping of perceptions that made certain truths seem less reliable and certain choices appear inevitable. Each season revealed the fractures more clearly. Kody's other wives, Mary, Christine, and Janelle, began to sense a shift, subtle at first, unmistakable over time. Their influence waned not because of a single dramatic event, but because of a series of meticulously orchestrated psychological nudges. Robyn's presence became central, her opinions increasingly weighted, and her desires slowly codified as priorities over the collective harmony that had once characterized the family. This was not an overnight transformation. It was the product of patience, strategy, and a keen understanding of emotional leverage. The narrative of polygamy, with its public fascination and scrutiny, also added layers of pressure. Cameras captured every smile, every tear, and every tension-filled conversation, making private struggles public and personal decisions subject to external judgment. Robyn's mastery of presentation, of framing situations in ways that highlighted her perspective while subtly undermining dissenting voices, played a crucial role in consolidating her influence. Fans who believed they were simply watching family dynamics were in fact witnessing a carefully choreographed psychological maneuver that would eventually redefine Kody's choices and the family's trajectory as the seasons progressed. Moments that might have seemed trivial to casual viewers took on enormous significance. A disagreement over holiday plans, a conversation about child-rearing, or a subtle critique during a family dinner all became instruments of influence. Robyn's ability to assert her preferences while maintaining an image of collaborative spirit allowed her to quietly guide Kody toward decisions that aligned with her objectives. The result was a reconfiguration of priorities that often left the other wives questioning their role and value within the household. This strategic ascendancy did not occur in isolation. Kody's personality, a mixture of loyalty, desire for harmony, and occasional indecision, created the perfect environment for subtle persuasion. Robyn's understanding of these traits allowed her to navigate the family with an almost invisible hand, gradually ensuring that her perspective carried the most weight. The gaslighting was not overt. It was the gentle redefinition of reality, the consistent undermining of alternative viewpoints, and the creation of doubt that shifted the family dynamic over time. The story, however, is not just about manipulation. It is about the consequences of unchecked influence, the emotional toll of invisible power struggles, and the slow unraveling of relationships that were once publicly celebrated as exemplary. The Brown family, like many polygamous households under scrutiny, faced external pressures, media attention, and the intense public interest that often magnified internal conflicts. Robyn's ascent within this context was both a testament to her strategic acumen and a reflection of vulnerabilities within the family structure that allowed such influence to thrive. Fans and critics alike watched with fascination and horror as the family's dynamics transformed. Conversations that once fostered connection became tools for control. Moments of affection were intertwined with subtle obligations, and decisions that seemed personal were often guided by intricate emotional leverage. The camera captured the surface, but the underlying currents, the strategic interactions, the psychological recalibrations, and the incremental shifts in trust, revealed a story far more complex and compelling than what appeared on screen. Ultimately, the journey from a polygamous household to a controversial monogamous reality was not a single event but a series of orchestrated maneuvers. Robyn's influence, often invisible to those outside the family, redefined the relationships, decisions, and emotional landscape of the Browns. It was a transformation that spoke not only to the power of strategic interpersonal dynamics but also to the fragility of familial bonds under pressure, scrutiny, and manipulation. As we continue to explore this story, the layers of strategy, emotion, and control unfold, revealing the depth of the drama that fans witnessed but may not have fully understood. The tale of Kody and Robyn is not just a reality TV spectacle. It is a study in human behavior, influence, and the consequences of psychological maneuvering within a family system constantly observed, dissected, and judged. The journey ahead will delve deeper into the specific moments, conversations, and decisions that cemented Robyn's influence, the reactions of the other wives as they navigated shifting loyalties, and the profound impact on Kody himself. It is a story of ambition, manipulation, and the quiet, almost imperceptible ways that trust and authority can be reshaped over time, a narrative that continues to captivate and shock audiences years after the events unfolded. The continuation of Kody and Robyn Brown's story, where the subtle art of influence begins to take its heaviest toll on those who once stood by his side. By now, the intricate web of manipulation had become less a secret and more an invisible framework guiding the family's decisions, unseen by the cameras, but felt in every conversation, every dinner, every family moment. Robyn's influence was not merely about asserting preferences, it was about shaping perception. She understood Kody's vulnerabilities, his desire for harmony, and the very human instinct to avoid confrontation. With each carefully chosen word, each softly phrased suggestion, she guided him to prioritize her perspective without the overt appearance of coercion. Kody, often trusting to a fault, gradually internalized these nudges as his own reasoning. What looked like a consensual family decision was, in fact, a meticulously orchestrated shift in power. The other wives, Mary, Christine, and Janelle, began to notice the subtle but undeniable changes. Their conversations with Kody, once full of collaboration and shared vision, now carried an edge of tension. Their suggestions, ideas, and feelings were met with hesitation, reconsideration, or dismissal in favor of Robyn's inclinations. The cameras captured polite interactions, smiles exchanged, and outwardly functional family moments, but behind the lens, a silent struggle was unfolding. Each wife felt the weight of influence, the creeping sense that their voices mattered less in the hierarchy Robyn was establishing. This period marked the height of psychological maneuvering. Robyn's strategies were multifaceted. She leveraged Kody's insecurities, subtly questioned the competence or commitment of the other wives, and positioned herself as the stabilizing force capable of maintaining the family's cohesion. By creating narratives where she appeared indispensable, she not only secured influence over Kody but also instilled doubt in the hearts of the others. This was no rash power grab. It was patient, deliberate, and chillingly effective. Fans watching from home might have interpreted tensions as typical family disagreements, but insiders knew better. Every interaction carried a subtext, every choice reflected a hidden calculus. Robyn's mastery lay in her ability to blend overt cooperation with covert control, presenting herself as supportive while reshaping the family's emotional and decision-making landscape. Kody, caught between his genuine care for all his wives and the compelling narratives Robyn wove, found himself increasingly aligned with her perspective. The subtle erosion of trust had cascading effects. Family events, once joyful and inclusive, became stages where the hierarchy of influence was quietly tested and reinforced. Decisions about holidays, children, and shared responsibilities were no longer neutral. They reflected the slowly consolidating power structure. Even minor disagreements were magnified, analyzed, and recontextualized to strengthen Robyn's standing while weakening challenges from the other wives. It was a psychological chess game played in everyday life, with Kody's attention as the most coveted prize. This relentless shaping of perception was compounded by the external pressures of reality TV. Cameras immortalized every reaction, every small concession, every moment of hesitation. Public perception, social media commentary, and fan speculation added layers of complexity, amplifying stress and reinforcing behavioral patterns. Robyn navigated this ecosystem with precision, using both private influence and public image to secure her position. Kody, in turn, became increasingly reliant on her guidance, perceiving her judgment as a stabilizing force amid both familial and external scrutiny. As Robyn's influence solidified, the other wives faced difficult choices. Some tried confrontation, others sought compromise, but the cumulative weight of subtle manipulation made effective resistance increasingly challenging. Kody's responses, shaped by repeated exposure to Robyn's perspectives and subtle framing, often reflected alignment with her desires, even when it contradicted prior agreements or understanding. The once fluid family dynamic began to harden into predictable patterns, signaling the success of a long-term strategy that few outside the immediate circle fully comprehended. Behind every smile, every polite nod, and every moment captured for the audience, there was an underlying tension. Conversations about fairness, attention, and shared responsibility were infiltrated by Robyn's influence, making Kody's decisions appear reasonable, impartial, and motivated by love, while effectively diminishing the authority and impact of the other wives. This was not overt aggression. It was the invisible hand of emotional recalibration, a steady redefinition of who mattered most, whose opinions carried the greatest weight, and which choices were ultimately prioritized. The consequences extended beyond interpersonal dynamics. Children observed the subtle shifts, sensing not only the preferences of their parents but the emotional undercurrents that dictated responses and priorities. These shifts subtly reshaped family culture, loyalty structures, and emotional security, creating an environment where Robyn's vision guided not only decisions but the very emotional climate of the household. What seemed like normal family adaptation was, in reality, a profound restructuring of relationships and influence. Observers noted the increasing alignment between Kody and Robyn's decisions. Whether discussing schedules, relocations, or public appearances, the consistency of their partnership stood in stark contrast to the growing distance from the other wives. Fans speculated, criticized, and debated, but the internal mechanisms were invisible. Subtle framing, careful communication, and the quiet erosion of alternative perspectives. Kody's trust in Robyn's judgment was not coerced. It was engineered through patience, consistency, and an intimate understanding of his values, fears, and motivations. The family's trajectory, once characterized by shared decision-making and collaborative problem-solving, now reflected a concentrated center of influence. Robyn's presence, influence, and strategic positioning dictated the pace, tone, and outcome of key decisions. The other wives, once confident in their roles, found themselves navigating an environment increasingly defined by Robyn's priorities and framing. What had begun as subtle persuasion matured into structural dominance, a quiet assertion of control that reshaped the family's social and emotional landscape. Fans watching the show may have felt shock at the overt outcomes, the eventual push toward monogamy, the apparent favoring of Robyn, and the tension-filled interactions, but few grasped the intricate psychological groundwork that enabled such outcomes. Each season's events, each episode's moments, carried the echoes of months or years of carefully measured influence, emotional recalibration, and strategic positioning. The cameras captured only the surface, while the real narrative unfolded in quiet rooms, private conversations, and carefully orchestrated decisions. The escalating tension within the Brown household, where each subtle maneuver, each whispered suggestion, and each strategic interaction began to culminate in consequences that could no longer be ignored. The groundwork laid by Robyn's patient influence had begun to bear fruit, shaping decisions and relationships with a quiet but undeniable authority. What once seemed like minor disagreements or polite compromises now reflected the slow but deliberate reshaping of the family's emotional and social structure. As the cameras captured polite exchanges and staged family events, the invisible threads of manipulation tugged at the very fabric of trust that held the household together. Kody, often caught between genuine care and the persuasive subtlety of Robyn's influence, found himself increasingly aligning with her vision. Each decision, each concession seemed natural, inevitable even, but the story behind these choices was one of careful orchestration. Robyn's strategy was not about confrontation. It was about shaping perception, guiding thought, and redefining priorities in ways that appeared organic. The other wives began to feel the cumulative effects. Mary, Christine, and Janelle, once confident in their roles and influence, now faced a reality where their opinions were marginalized, their input measured against the subtle weight of Robyn's positioning. Attempts to assert themselves or challenge decisions were met with gentle but firm rebuttals, often framed in ways that made resistance seem unreasonable or emotionally charged. The psychological calculus was precise. Undermine without overt aggression, control without appearing controlling, influence without exposure. Family gatherings, holidays, and shared responsibilities became stages for these dynamics to play out. Every conversation about schedules, children, and household priorities carried subtext, each decision subtly reinforcing Robyn's centrality while diminishing alternative voices. The pattern was clear. Alignment with Robyn's perspective yielded validation, approval, and harmony, while dissent introduced friction and perceived instability. The quiet efficiency of this system demonstrated the effectiveness of patient, strategic influence over overt confrontation. Kody's role was complex. His genuine affection for all his wives and desire to maintain family cohesion made him receptive to guidance, particularly when presented as supportive or stabilizing. Robyn's understanding of his character allowed her to frame recommendations in ways that appealed to his need for harmony, subtly steering him toward choices that reinforced her position. It was influence without coercion, persuasion without visible pressure, and the results were increasingly apparent in both private interactions and public appearances. The impact on the other wives was profound. Emotional fatigue set in as repeated marginalization, subtle undermining, and shifts in decision-making patterns created a sense of diminished agency. Small acts of assertiveness were met with resistance, reframed as misunderstandings or gently redirected, leaving the wives questioning their perceptions and priorities. The cumulative effect was a gradual erosion of confidence and a reordering of the family hierarchy, one that elevated Robyn's influence and solidified Kody's alignment with her perspective. Public perception, amplified by social media, fan commentary, and the constant scrutiny of reality TV, added layers of complexity. Robyn's ability to navigate these external pressures with poise and strategic framing further cemented her position. She appeared collaborative, considerate, and stabilizing, while simultaneously consolidating power in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Kody, observing public reactions and seeking validation, increasingly relied on her judgment as a guide, reinforcing the internal dynamics she had carefully engineered. The narrative of polygamy, once marked by shared authority and collaborative decision-making, now reflected a centralized pattern of influence. Robyn's strategic positioning created a framework where her preferences became the default, her priorities the lens through which decisions were filtered. The other wives, while still present and active, found their voices increasingly secondary, their influence diluted, and their emotional investment subjected to constant recalibration. As tensions mounted, moments of confrontation inevitably emerged. Disagreements over children, property, or media exposure highlighted the differences in perception and priorities. However, these confrontations rarely resulted in overt conflict. Instead, they were absorbed into the larger pattern of influence, reframed, and resolved in ways that further reinforced Robyn's centrality. The subtlety of this approach ensured that power dynamics shifted without dramatic ruptures, maintaining an appearance of family cohesion while systematically restructuring relationships. Kody's internal struggle was palpable. Torn between genuine care for his other wives and the compelling narratives constructed by Robyn, he oscillated between loyalty, doubt, and emotional fatigue. Each concession, while framed as a rational decision, reflected the underlying psychological architecture of influence that Robyn had established over time. Observers might interpret these choices as personal preference or affection, but the deeper reality revealed a sophisticated interplay of perception, persuasion, and emotional recalibration. The children too were affected by these dynamics. Sensitive to the shifting currents of attention, priority, and emotional energy, they responded in ways that reinforced the hierarchy Robyn had quietly established. Allegiances, emotional security, and behavioral patterns adapted to the new structure, further consolidating Robyn's central influence. What appeared as typical family adaptation was, in fact, the product of sustained psychological strategy. As the household edged closer to the controversial transition toward monogamy, the consequences of these dynamics became increasingly visible. Decisions previously approached collectively were now influenced, if not determined, by Robyn's framing. The other wives, grappling with the emotional weight of diminished influence, faced the challenge of navigating relationships that had been subtly but systematically altered. Public audiences, captivated by the unfolding drama, witnessed the results without fully appreciating the complex mechanisms behind them. This chapter of the Brown family saga is a testament to the power of subtle, strategic influence within intimate relationships. Robyn's approach, combining emotional intelligence, strategic patience, and nuanced psychological insight, reshaped not only Kody's decisions but the broader family dynamic. The shift toward monogamy, framed publicly as a personal choice or natural evolution, was deeply rooted in these quiet, consistent maneuvers that redefined trust, authority, and priority within the household. The final chapter of Kody and Robyn Brown's story, where the quiet manipulations, subtle psychological strategies, and patient influence that had defined the previous seasons culminate in undeniable consequences. The family, once celebrated for its cohesion and balance, now faced the reality of choices shaped by strategic control, emotional recalibration, and the intricate dynamics of trust and perception. The journey toward monogamy, while seemingly natural to outsiders, was the product of years of careful maneuvering. Robyn's influence, now fully entrenched, had reshaped Kody's priorities, decisions, and emotional investments. What had begun as subtle persuasion had matured into structural dominance, redefining not only relationships but the very emotional framework of the household. Each conversation, each decision, and each shared moment bore the invisible mark of her strategy. The other wives, Mary, Christine, and Janelle, confronted the stark reality of their shifting roles. Efforts to assert authority or reclaim influence were met with sophisticated deflections, subtle reframing, and carefully orchestrated alignment by Kody and Robyn. The quiet erosion of agency left them navigating an environment where their voices, though present, no longer held the weight they once commanded. Moments that once reflected collaboration now emphasized compliance, subtle agreement, or carefully managed dissent. Public perception amplified the tension. Social media, fan discussions, and media commentary magnified every decision, reaction, and interaction. Robyn's strategic navigation of both internal and external pressures reinforced her position, creating a dual layer of influence: psychological control within the household and image control outside it. Kody, seeking harmony, validation, and guidance, increasingly relied on Robyn's judgment, solidifying the alignment that had quietly been cultivated over years. The emotional impact on the family was profound. Children, acutely sensitive to the shifting dynamics, adjusted their behavior, loyalty, and emotional responses in ways that mirrored the subtle hierarchy Robyn had established. The household culture, shaped by patterns of attention, affirmation, and influence, had evolved into a structure that prioritized her presence and priorities. What appeared externally as normal family adaptation was, in reality, a meticulously guided restructuring. Moments of confrontation, while inevitable, were absorbed into the larger system of influence. Disagreements over scheduling, media exposure, or family decisions were reframed by Robyn and Kody in ways that appeared reasonable, fair, and grounded in love. The subtle art of influence ensured that power shifts occurred without overt conflict, preserving the outward appearance of cohesion while fundamentally altering the family's decision-making architecture. As the transition toward monogamy became increasingly apparent, the consequences of these dynamics reached their peak. Decisions that once required negotiation among multiple wives were now centralized, reflecting the culmination